Hey guys, welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. I just went to the Bitcoin Bush Bash, which is an event here in Australia that is a no KYC event. This one's in Beechworth, which is 4 hours north of Melbourne. And I made a presentation about Bitcoin podcasting and what I've learned over the last 12 months and what I describe as leverage in the digital age. So I'm going to make this as a digital presentation now. Welcome. Thank you for joining, and I appreciate your time. So what is on store for today? Roughly a 20-minute presentation, and in Beechworth, I had a Q&A session as well. A bit about myself. My name is Jake. I'm a Bitcoiner. I host the Bitcoin with Jake podcast, of which I've now released 70 episodes over the last 12 months. As this was a live presentation, I did some questions and I asked, who listens to podcasts? There's an audience of, I don't know, let's say 80, 100 people. Basically, everyone sticks their hands up. Bitcoin podcast listeners, and obviously it was a Bitcoin event, so we got the majority of the audience saying, yep, I listen to Bitcoin podcasts. And quite amazingly, I asked, well, who listens to Bitcoin with Jake? And probably 30% of the room put their hands up. So shout out to you guys. I really appreciate the support. I can't believe how much progress has been made in the last year, and very cool to see people actually listening to what I create. So thank you very much. Now, why are you guys listening to this presentation? Well, it's hopefully going to help you avoid the mistakes I've made. I've created a pretty streamlined process for how this actually functions in the background, and that's what I'm going to go through. It's incredible what I've learned. The people I've spoken to, the lens that they have on the world, and the value that they see in Bitcoin, it makes me insanely bullish. So keep that in mind. Like, we are in for one hell of a ride, and Bitcoin is the most extraordinary innovation. And my real aim for this presentation and what I did at Beechworth, shout out to Mikey Scanlan and to Dale, who I think are my two targets here, but I wanted to inspire one other person to start a podcast. So what are we going to really talk about in this presentation? I'm going to go through three major things: creating a podcast, competing as a podcast, and monetizing a podcast. Initially, though, I just want to start off by mentioning this quote that I came across recently as part of my research, and I think it actually it helps the headless chicken within me that's been creating like a maniac for the last year, but not quite sure in what direction I'm going. That is this quote by Albert Einstein. So try not to become a person of success, but a person of value. Very, very useful to keep in mind when you're going through this content creation process. The reason I haven't made a full presentation for this is I want to take you through a workflow that I've done. So creating a podcast, how in the hell do you create a podcast? Well, there's a three-tiered process that I go through: production, publishing, and promotion. And I'm going to show you with the screen share on what I actually do. So everything begins at Twitter, basically. My most recent episode is with Jeff Booth. And just to scroll back here, so I reached out to him on DM. We were already friends from, interacting on Twitter, and he joined a previous podcast of mine. Shout out to Matty and to Jigs. We created something called We're So Bloody Early, which was our kind of first version. And I wanted to go off and do my own podcast, which is why I ended up doing just Bitcoin with Jake. So contacted Jeff. Cool. Agree a time. Boom. Okay. You're in the calendar. Excellent. Come across here. Here are my meetings in Zoom. So I use Zoom as my primary recording tool. That's what I'm using today to share the screen and do this presentation. You can see here some of my upcoming meetings I've got zoned in. So you record the call using Zoom. I've had a ton of things that I've had to learn through this process as to how to interact with people. Things like don't jump in and interrupt someone. Let them finish their sentence. Try not to repeat stories that your listeners have already heard. It's turning out it's a real art, and it's hopefully something I'm improving at. Here is something called Descript, which is a tool. It's a pretty nifty software tool for editing audio and editing video. It's very useful, so you should check that out. So we've gone through the first couple steps. We've identified the guest. We've DM'd them. We've got them agreed to a time. We jump online. We do a Zoom call. We have the interview. We record. Yes, I've lost recordings. Yes, I didn't press record. Yes, there's all sorts of kind of things that can go wrong during that process, but fingers crossed you get your recording file, your raw audio goes into here, and you do your editing process. Now, I'm currently working with a producer, Pat. Shout out to Pat. And another critical part of this, still the production phase. I'm going to flick over here to a piece of software called Notion. I'm going to go to my podcast workflow, and then here to my database. And so this is where I keep the details of people that I'd like to get on the show. I've got 125 people I haven't even contacted, another 30 or so that I've had interactions with about having conversations. Here, things that have scheduled and upcoming, as you saw from my Zoom, and then recorded episodes, and then published. Now, just to pull this little tab up here, I move the person through this kind of workflow, but I have a status for them. I have details on their Twitter account. I have their expected interview date. So when am I going to talk to them? And then when am I actually going to release it? So KG's episode is going to come out tomorrow. And then I've got a whole checklist of things that has to be gone through. So here, schedule the guest. Then I put out a tweet saying I'm speaking to so-and-so, any questions? And then Pat here, he's going through and he's working out like what parts of the editing process has he gone through. That's still the production phase. Then here I talk about promotion and what's important to do, but I'll get to that later. And then at the very end here, I've got the show notes template, basically. Each set of show notes that we create follows the same format, right? So, who's in the show, what are the timestamps, where are the contacts to get hold of them, who's sponsored the episodes, and any other relevant information, asking the audience some call to actions, etc. So to come back over here, once you've created your podcast, you've recorded it, you've done the editing process, you're then ready to get to the next phase, which is to publish. So here is a platform I use called Anchor, which is owned by Spotify. And you basically have a home here where you upload your episodes. Here are my previously posted episodes. I'm not going to go into the detail in the analytics right now. I just showed you a page which is podcast availability. So this is all done on RSS feed. So I post my episode onto Anchor. I'm ready to publish. And then you can see here it's going blasted out to Apple, to Google, to Amazon, and to wherever else you send your audio file to. Now I'm also doing video. So I do that with YouTube. And so it's the same kind of thing. You've got a YouTube channel, you come along and you upload your videos and then you make them public. The final stage of this kind of content creation process is Twitter. Now, this is my chosen social media platform. It's where most Bitcoin conversation happens right now. There are other options, it's possible. But here you can see I'm posting videos, like mini clips of the long form content, saying episode upcoming or episode dropping, and then different kind of sections that I thought were interesting. Now, just to come back to my presentation. So what we've been talking about here is how to create a podcast. I've talked about production, publishing, and promotion. In summary, they're all off-the-shelf tools. It just requires some hustle. The next phase, competing as a podcast, something I want to talk through today. People, and myself included, procrastination kills ideas, right? Oh, I'd like to be a Bitcoin podcaster. Oh, there's too many out there. I can't possibly do that. But something to consider is, if we're at 1% adoption of Bitcoin on the hyper Bitcoinization cycle, that's 99% more people that have to figure out that that's the best store of wealth or the best form of money they could possibly utilize. Now, some people consider, say, a 10% phase of adoption right now. Okay, well, that's still 90%. So even the biggest podcasts today, I think, are only covering what is a potential total addressable market 10 times bigger or 90 times bigger. I mean, it could be huge, right? So I want to show you something here, which is my podcast competitions page that I've picked up. So, some podcasts I've learned so much from over the years. The top 3 here started the longest ago, but What Bitcoin Did, Tales from the Crypt, Pomp, I've listened to a bunch of his stuff, Guy Swan, Preston, Stefan. These guys have pumped out amazing content for years now. But there's some variables you can kind of play around with. What I can change, episode cadence. So how often are you sending out episodes? 3 times a week, once per week, once per month, every day, twice a day. Then you've got duration. So you could do a 15 minutes, you could do a 20 minutes, you could do half an hour, you could do an hour. I like one-to-one interviews myself for the most impact. But again, you could have a group of people or however you might want to do it. And I've talked about niche here. Pomp, for example, is a bit of a wider investor bracket, a bit more crypto focused. What Bitcoin Did is perhaps best for like a noob, so someone who's fresh into Bitcoin. And so there's other areas that you could potentially take a niche and then take a niche of a niche and take a niche of a niche of a niche. Further along here, I've got some interesting stuff in terms of where I've heard information coming through on monthly running costs or the type of revenues that they might be making, and Twitter followings, and then sponsor details and YouTube subscribers, etc. What I want to get across, though, is most importantly, these different variables that you can kind of play around with. Some of the conclusions I'm coming to is that there's not necessarily a fantastic daily show. Like even the shows that say that they're daily aren't actually daily. And as you can see, most of the durations were over 30 minutes. Okay, well, what if you focus more on doing 30 minutes or less? And then again, a niche of a niche of a niche, and something I'm really interested in is startups. So it's probably wealth creation, then cryptocurrency, then Bitcoin, and then it could be an entrepreneurship focus or specifically a kind of venture capital focus. Some of the things I'm trying to think about. Anyway, the point is competing as a podcast is absolutely possible and opportunities exist. The final part of today and the presentation I'm making is about monetizing a podcast, or at least the final topic. I've made some money this year, so I've managed to monetize the content I've been creating. So just to run you through the numbers, I had some hardware costs, computer, phone, laptop light. I already own the mic. There's then some monthly software costs that come through that are noted here. So Notion, I mentioned before, I pay for Zoom, Descript, the audio editing platform. Pat's paying for Adobe, which he uses for part of his editing process. I've also had costs in terms of the producer. So total cost for the year, not including my time, of course, just shy of 8,000 Australian dollars. I was then very lucky to gain a sponsorship deal with Fast Bitcoin. Shout out to Danny and Nathan in particular and the team there, who were paying me $250 an episode for what I released. So I logically started pumping out 6 episodes per month. That ended after 6 months, just recently. I've had some income in the value for value space. So Fountain, I've made 40 odd bucks. I started a fund page recently. Mick Marucci was on the show. So listen to his episode if you're interested in what he's doing there, which is basically Bitcoin focused crowdfunding. What's kind of cool, I think, to really think about here is like, what does it mean for digitally native payments and value for value in the future? Moving away from a kind of business to business focused business model here, where sponsorship contracts are your most important thing, and more to really focus on that like in sync audience paid content creation. The incentive alignment is clearly much, much better, but you can also clearly see that the revenue gain from the value for value space is very, very small percentage compared to the rest. Anyway, where does that leave us? Just over 9 grand earned for the year, and I've made over $1,000 from this. So not a huge amount of money as a small business, I must admit. But the point being is you can make money from monetizing content, and I'm still only coming up to 1 year of doing this. I'd also like to show you my latest sponsorship program document that I've been sending out to potential sponsors. Get in touch if you are interested in sponsorship, of course, and if you'd like to see any of these documents, I'm happy to share them with people. The point here is that the audience that you're speaking to, the content you're creating, it generates some data, and that data is valuable to brands. So what a content creation process like what I'm going through really is I sell exposure. And so who am I selling exposure to? Well, funny enough, YouTube and Anchor are very effective tools for figuring that out. First and foremost, just to run through these high level numbers here, I've managed to basically rack up, this is an important one. So I create long form conversations via Zoom, and then we chop them up and we send them out as mini videos. But I'm now in the last month or so creating just shy of 10,000 listens and views across, all platforms. Not bad for a year or so in. The question is, how can we make money from that? Or do we want to make money from that? All-time listens, I haven't been able to calculate because Twitter data it's not doing very well, frankly. It doesn't work properly, but we're basically at 25,000 all-time views and listens across Anchor and YouTube. Really quite exciting. Proof of traction for sure, but could it be better? How do we improve on that? Now, just to show you some of the breakdowns on how this actually works, I've also got some social media profiles. Apologies if I jump around a bit here, but I've got just under 7,000 followers on my personal Twitter profile. The exciting number here, I've been playing around with different strategies. In January, I said I wanted to send out 12 tweets per day. I generated 1 million impressions. Well, that is valuable to brands. You'd have to spend a lot of money to actually create that if you're paying for advertising. And my podcast profile, where I share clips of the podcast, here you can see 40,000, 35,000, 17-ish so far this March. So that ticks along. Like the promotion side of things, social media is very useful. That's where the eyeballs are. That's where the attention is. Can you get people to listen to your long form content as a result of playing around in social media? I think you absolutely can. Now, that's a bit about the performance, how many listens, how many views, what's happening on social media, how much attention is it getting? Who is the person showing attention? Well, this is where things get a little more interesting. Audience details. So Anchor and YouTube, they slightly skew differently, interestingly. So I can talk you through those over here. So here's my Anchor page. As you can see, so almost 13,000 listens all time. And then to look at the audience, which is where I was kind of going to. So last 30 days, let's just do all time. So 30% of my listeners are in Australia, 27% in the United States, 9% UK, 6% Canada. Something really cool about this is when you flick all the way to the end and you look, oh my gosh, someone in Nepal has listened, someone in Pakistan, someone in Ghana, someone in New Caledonia. I don't even know where that is. Wow, it's just amazing the amount of people that have showed interest in this. And then where are they listening? Spotify, 32%, Apple, 30%, Fountain, value for value platform, sats being sent, being boosted. I showed you earlier, just to jump back. So 411 supporters on Fountain. That's really interesting. That's quite a few people that have sent me some kind of money. And then you got gender, very large skew male, 85%. Age, largest bracket is 35 to 44. Now, just to look at YouTube for a moment. So since I started YouTube, which is really only in December, I've had 15,000 views. This is the amazing part. And this is where I really talk about leverage. So going back to that previous audience stat, like people in Nepal listening to my content, wow, like you'd never meet this person, right? But digital tools like I'm showing you now, this is leverage. This is extraordinary leverage. Now, Anchor doesn't show you this, but here on YouTube, so 918 hours of consumption time. What? So I've done 70 episodes, of which like some of them are hour, some of them hour and a half, but let's say maximum I've done 100 hours of content. So I've got 918 hours listened to. So you've got 9x the amount of time you've put into it from a conversation perspective that people have gained value. Now, if I remind you, this presentation is called Bitcoin Podcasting, Leverage in the Digital Age. This is really what I'm referring to as leverage. Like, wow. So the amount of time I've put in there, putting aside the editing, etc., people have gained extraordinary value from it, from multiple parts of the world, but also for a lot of time. I mean, this is amazing. Now, just in terms of viewer age, because I showed you that already, you'll see here, this is, lifetime. So YouTube skews a bit younger, 35% at 25 to 34, but the gender is still, 85% male. And in terms of geography, again, it's a little different. So the US actually comes first, 26%, Oz, 20%, Canada, 4%, United Kingdom, 2.8%, India, and let's go all the way down to the bottom. Iraq, Hungary, Croatia, Hong Kong, Ethiopia. Isn't this crazy? People are actually finding value in this stuff from places I would never, ever get to. And I just wanted to show you lastly, so this is my personal profile and the impressions that I was mentioning in terms of the performance of the podcast. So I've slowed down on the strategy I had earlier this year. So, 100K impressions this month, 350 from Feb, but back here in Jan, 1 million. Okay, so if I continued up with that rate of tweeting, then I could consider that like a regular performance metric that I'd like to hit. So I was showing my sponsor program. So you've had some details on the performance, you've had some details on the audience itself. How do we monetize this in terms of products? So within each episode, there's of course a scripted advert option, which is this here. On YouTube, you could send a banner, so like a little pop-up during the video that comes in with a brand name or whatever might be the case. And also you've got show notes. So every time you post something, you've got a section in which you can note the sponsors. You could also have your affiliate link, so people, get 10% off here and have a revenue. I mentioned that slightly later. So short form, so on the clips that I create, so these small 30-second or 1-minute bite-sized segments, there could also be branded logos, etc., put in at the end of these. So if you remember back here, I didn't highlight it at the time, but Twitter last month, I had over 5,000 views of short form content via my podcast profile. So every time those views happen, they're just 30 seconds long. So you can make a good guess that people will also see the brand name at the end. So I think very, very valuable is to start monetizing these short form clips on social media. When I post an episode, an episode release advert, so I'll have my sponsor mentioned and tagged underneath with then links that audience members can go and get discounts, etc., etc. Or I could also use the profile. So I could put in my bio, Jake Woodhouse at Bitcoin with Jake, podcast host, sponsored by at Fast Bitcoins. And I get, multiple profile visits a month. So, 2,300 profile visits this month, 6,000 in Feb, and then the Twitter analytics is not great. So I don't know what's happened to that particular bit of data. You could pin tweets at the top of profiles, right? So sponsors get more visibility to the traffic you're generating. So affiliate marketing, this is where you have, at checkout, 10% discount, use, Jake, and you have a revenue share in place with the customer. Next would be traffic monitoring. So this is something that Pat was actually really sharp on, was using custom URL links. So we can see exactly how many people click on the sponsor's website in the show notes, for example. And that's really cool. So I can see how many people are actively heading from my content to different locations. We'd also pump out a monthly report, which says, you spent X, here's the impressions generated, here's the listens, here's the views, here's the exposure that your company has gained as a result of doing this. Now, the question is, how much will people pay for this? The truth is, and going back to this podcasting competition thing that I created, it's very, very difficult to find out how much people get paid. Now, I heard Peter McCormack in a recent episode say that he spends 120,000 US dollars a month on creating his content. That's huge cost. And obviously one assumes he's being paid a significant portion more than that to actually do it. That's actually Aussie dollars there, 181. But the point is it's not a transparent marketplace in terms of other podcasters. I'm asking for 2,500 Aussie dollars a month as a retainer for being a customer. So whatever content we generate as a podcast, you'll have your brand name on there, you'll have your show note mentions, etc. And interestingly, and to be blunt, I haven't had anyone agree that price yet. So I'm in negotiation with a number of potential customers, and so I'll see how that plays out. And I'm more than happy to share what the process was like. And frankly, if you can get 4 customers paying you 2,500 Aussie dollars a month, then things start to look interesting as a small business. But I've had a fair bit of pushback at that price, and in one case someone said I'm 10 times too expensive. So let's see how that plays out. You can keep things super flexible, right? You can cancel with 1 month written notice, or even with Fast Bitcoins, it's just a mutual agreement. Guys, okay, we'll stop sponsorship as of the next episode. So I'm very relaxed from that perspective. And I hope you found that interesting. And the point I'm trying to make here is your audience is valuable, right? So the people that are listening, they represent value to other people. Now, I showed you a snippet of value for value and the future that might represent. But ultimately, what I've realized is that, these 3 points, if anyone's out there thinking about starting a podcast, it requires some hustle, opportunities exist, and the audience is potentially monetizable. Now, I just want to talk through a few things that I've gained in value that aren't necessarily obvious from those 3 previous topics. Speaking to all these people in different parts of the world with different lens on Bitcoin, it has been an extraordinarily useful tool to deepen my conviction in what Bitcoin is. Now, maybe 5 years ago or so, I was doing some angel investing. This is early stage equity investing in technology startups, and it's all about the people. Like, who are the people that are doing this company? Why are they slightly better or have a unique edge over the rest? Is the market size huge? And what I really loved from that was getting to know people. And Bitcoin is very, very similar, and I've used it in a similar sense. So who are the people adopting Bitcoin? And the people that I'm finding that are adopting Bitcoin are super intelligent. They have a really good use case for it. And there's a whole load of reasons that I think that it's a great thing to be doing, to be buying Bitcoin. So it's helped deepen my conviction, but that's then led through to a capital reallocation process. And if anything that Nassim Taleb taught me from his book, Skin in the Game, ask someone what they own, not what they think. So in my case, of my investable net worth, I'm now 80% Bitcoin. And previously that was real estate in London. Previously that was real estate in Melbourne. I've sold the whole lot. It's a pain in the ass selling property, but I've done it. And I've managed to reallocate into a self-custody, and I'm super, super excited about that process. Like, the upside for Bitcoin's massive. The come for the gain, stay for the revolution. I went back just to remind you guys at the start of this about being incredibly bullish as a result of this process, and that's where this really comes in. I've also had some employment contracts come to light, or opportunities, I should say. I won't mention exactly what they are, but the point is you're generating value, you're creating a name, you're connecting with people. Next point, a new network. So every time you speak to someone, record a conversation, you help them promote what they're working on. They're willing to share with you their network, what you're creating. And you suddenly start to see how, like, every guest is a way to, again, leverage. You're getting leverage in the digital space every time you're doing this stuff. I've had angel investment opportunities come across my desk. So people who are raising equity positions, early stage companies that are working on Bitcoin. Absolutely epic area for potential. And lastly, I've had potential co-founding opportunities come out. So starting companies. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. So I've gained huge value from starting a podcast, and I'm now 12 months in and I'm still figuring it out. So to summarize, start a podcast. It just requires some hustle. So anyone can create that workflow I've just gone through. Opportunities exist. So yes, there's competition out there, but you can see there's a few variables you can start to tweak. You could go niche within a niche within a niche. You could go 30 minutes. You could go, different styles or different formats. And what that's created for me is a hugely valuable entry point into the world of Bitcoin. I've made lots of new friends. I've actually friends for life, like, really incredible process. Meeting them in person is even better. Like, get yourself to a bush bash if you're here in Australia. Awesome experience, or anywhere else in the world for that matter. I hope to get to a lot more Bitcoin events in the future. It's meant that I've, created value for other people, but also for myself. And yes, the balance sheet of the podcast doesn't necessarily show that, but the previous slide really explains that in some ways your podcast is like a lost leader. You're generating value elsewhere. And for me, the Bitcoin position I've managed to take, that's going to drive most of the gains I can create in the next 12 months. But that also means, I can potentially create a business out of this podcast. And I'm really excited to try and do that. Now, of course, this was a live presentation. A couple of things that I learned really interestingly is the Wi-Fi was crap. We went to a Q&A session. Some good questions came up, and thank you to anyone that got involved in that. Interactive stuff really just makes such a difference. But one thing I learned from presenting for the first time, this is the first time I'd ever done a public speaking event and presented something to people. Create your slides and stick to your slides. So I was messing around, moving from the laptop, standing up, not looking at the large projector, but more at my computer. And, the workflow was hard to show in the slides. And I kind of ran out of time making slides. But of course, this has been a screen share, so it's been easier to show you guys what to do. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. My name is Jake, and I'm the host of Bitcoin with Jake. Please reach out if there's anything I can do to help. And yeah, I hope one person is inspired to start a podcast about Bitcoin, because there's huge upside, in my opinion, in lots of different areas of your life. So thank you so much for your time today.